Hello and welcome to SEO Rankings Do Follow podcast. Here we hold regular talks with SEO and digital marketing experts to discuss hot SEO topics and share actionable insights with the SEO community. So subscribe to stay on top of everything going on in SEO. Today, we're going to talk about one of the biggest challenges facing growing e-commerce stores, SaaS, startups, nonprofits, and other small companies, SEO scaling. In layman's terms, this is the process of efficiently increasing the scope of search engine optimization strategies to manage and improve a large amount of web pages or content. Obviously, I'm not the expert on this topic. I just wanted to give you guys an intro, but we are here from two amazing experts today with profound experience and expertise in, among many other things, SEO scaling. So please give a warm welcome to our first guest, Tory Gray. She's the CEO and principal SEO consultant of the Gray Company, a full-service senior-level SEO consulting company specializing in digital strategy and tech solutions. Based in Toronto, Ontario, with offices in Atlanta, Georgia, the Gray Company helps engineering, marketing, and SEO teams connect the dots between objectives, insights, and executions. I love that part about connecting the dot, how you played around with the company name. Tory has over 14 years of experience in SEO and growth strategy, and she holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Mass Communication and Public Relations from the University of South Florida. Welcome, Tory. Happy to have you with us today. If you could please maybe say a couple of words about yourself and how you got into the SEO game.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us. Like you said, I'm both of those things. I'm a CEO and an SEO, and it's fun. Getting to see both sides of the business model. I care a lot about growth and caring a lot about scaling in order to make that happen. So I'm excited to be here and talk about this subject. Yeah, it's been great.
Awesome. And we're also joined by another guest, Sam Torres. She is the Chief Digital Officer and also the Gray Company, holding a Bachelor of Business Administration in Marketing from Georgia State University. Sam expertly navigates the digital landscape to drive the company's success. But actually, Sam's journey in SEO started with in web development, specifically for gaming organizations, where she sought to ensure their visibility when people search for communities. And I'd love to hear more about how your journey has developed since then.
So thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to talk about this. As far as my SEO experience, I've been doing this for about 13 years, most of it agency side. But yeah, did start as a front-end developer, so very code heavy. So when we're going to be talking about scaling SEO, I like to get into the really nitty-gritty, how do you actually build this machine? So super excited, love talking about SEO. I think it's fascinating. It's like the artistic side of tech. So let's
Great to have you with us. Thanks for taking the time, both of you. And let's probably start talking about SEO scaling, how we can help out different businesses with a framework and take that framework further on. So to start things off, probably you're going to start with Tory. Could you provide an overview of SEO at scale and explain why it's so important for growing e-commerce stores, SaaS startups, and like other small companies that have their future still ahead of them? But you're welcome to share the questions, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, scale is important because it's the primary mechanism through which growth occurs. And we usually want growth, right? That's the purpose of us being out here today. I think we also want to think about scale in terms of managing it when it's there with high quality, as well as creating scale in order to make that happen and move more business revenue. At the end of the day, we want to grow those products.
For us, the scale part is really how can businesses who aren't spending $1 billion on branding, so you're not Walmart, you're not Microsoft, but how do you still compete with brands like that? Especially when you probably don't carry the entire product catalog or service catalog that some of those larger, well-established companies have. But from a digital perspective, you're kind of all on even ground now. And so how scale is how you can start competing with some of those big brands. But obviously it has to be done in a really smart way and in a meaningful way, and especially with all the rise of AI, which I'm sure we're going to talk quite a bit about today.
Definitely. So then let's talk about how can we identify such opportunities for growth? Obviously, they exist for every company out there, but what is specifically to look out for to start sort of understanding this framework and how to move forward with it? Because obviously everything has to rely on data and stuff like that. So what would you suggest businesses to look out for in terms of growth opportunities, and maybe like specific patterns that help them identify scaling opportunities?
Absolutely. I think this usually starts one of two ways. It's either someone on the business has a fun idea and they're interested, they have a really good pulse on their user and their needs, and they want to meet that need. And then you're going to data to validate that it's there and make it happen. The other path is the opposite side of that funnel, right? To start with, hey, I'm seeing a pattern in my data. This is what we call DCI, or digital consumer insights. Really looking at the data you're finding on the web, whether that's, scraping YouTube, or that's looking at your search volume data to understand interest, and really identify the patterns in that data. So where are people replicating the same concern, but in slightly different variations, whether that's localization around a specific area that you could target, or say there's just variations by category or industry, right? What are the different things that people are seeking, and how do you identify those patterns and use that to drive what you're going to do? Because at the end of the day, what you don't want to do is create a solution that scales and is a lot of pages, but it actually doesn't meet any meaningful need. And so you just have a lot of pages on your site that are pulling their weight. They're just dragging you down throughout providing value of their own.
And I just wanted to clarify, in your experience, like we work obviously with clients, how much is this a revelation for them? How many clients have you had who have been working for a couple of years and just now realize that they have not been thinking about scaling from the get-go? How much of a problem is this for like businesses at large?
I mean, a lot of people want to think about scale. And I think the more common path is to say, hey, I want to do this thing. Let's see if it works. And they're like, it'll be a long tail. People will look for this. And so they create this program. And in that case, it's typically like a programmatic strategy where they're using a database to drive all these different page variations that might localize by area or again by industry. And the common problem is like they want it, but nobody's actually searching for it. And so it's actively hurting you, right? If you have a bunch of these things that are just dragging down your value. So that I'd say is much more common. I'd say what is innovative and what people are really intrigued by is actually the DCI. So it's understanding and leveraging and using the data that's available to you online and using it in ways that are not just SEO applications, frankly, because there's broader marketing implications when you understand that users prefer X subject over X subject, and that can help you define what you want to do. There's just so many applications even outside the world of marketing, and I think that is really, mind-bending for a lot of people when they think about, oh, do I want to go do this $150,000 market research project? Or can I actually get that data a lot quicker and a lot cheaper by understanding what people are doing on YouTube and understanding how people are interacting with TikTok and these other platforms that we can really engage with and understand actual behavior and actual sentiment and how we can use those to drive the system.
Yeah. And to answer your question about like, where do the light bulbs kind of go off typically for our clients? I'd say really where we find, I guess, kind of the nuggets or the areas where scale is suddenly really exciting and we see the most success, like those things have usually come out when we're talking about like, we've been doing research for influencing the product roadmap. So whether it's like Tory said, like we crawl Reddit, we look at YouTube comments and do sentiment analysis. And like, is there maybe a use case for a product that you hadn't foreseen, but your clients and your customers are using it that way? So understanding that, which sometimes that can also just come out when you're doing your persona research. So like for SaaS, for a lot of our SaaS clients, where we see the scale is really identifying what are the different pain points of whether it's your competitor solutions or the different features that would solve that pain point for your customers, right? There's a lot of different reasons why people end up coming to the web to buy and search. I guess search and buy is probably the right order for that. But there's a lot of different motivations. And when you actually get into the nitty-gritty, granular, like you're listing them out, that's when you start identifying those nuggets of what are the questions that people are actually asking? How do I answer them? And is there a way that I can tackle, one product might have 3 to 5 different uses. It could have 20 different uses, right? So really understanding, removing your own bias by doing that keyword research, by doing, just online sentiment analysis. So putting all of that together is where we've seen a lot of the light bulbs go off. Because again, it's to Tori's point, it's more than just marketing. Because at that point, we are influencing the product roadmap, right? We're able to identify, hey, your users, if you added this tiny little feature, you suddenly just doubled your audience because, they're asking for this. Your loyal users are, making comments in forums, right? There's just a lot of places where this inspiration can come from. But I think those are some of the ones where we've been able to get more than just the marketing team excited. And so you're able to get more organization buy-in, which of course, if you can get that, SEO always goes about 1,000,000 times faster and better. Yeah, like I say, identifying those different pain points or identifying different use cases for your services, for your products. Definitely, for those who know about like the Airbnb, what they did is they built all those programmatic pages of destinations and places to stay in like Denver and places to stay in St. Augustine. They did that programmatically. So that's obviously programmatic SEO. A lot of people want to emulate that. But I think, Tori, you were alluding to it earlier, like they want that, but they don't really know what to include there that actually makes it meaningful. And I think that's where a lot of people misstep. And so that's probably one of the ones where we see people come to us pretty often is they already have a programmatic idea. They just want to know how to do it properly so that they can have the success like Airbnb had, which for a quick summation of that, basically, I think it was COVID happened, right, Tori? So they turned off all paid advertising, and because they had this, they called it their SEO moat, they had all these programmatic pages, they almost lost no traffic because of how well optimized those programmatic pages were, because they had struck a really, really good balance between programmatic versus custom curation. So I'd say programmatic is probably what a lot of SEOs get excited about or start to ideate. And then the other is definitely UGC, where we see, so user-generated content, how do you invite users to submit their own things and post? And that comes with a whole slew of considerations, but can get really exciting. And probably some of the most innovative business ideas that I think I've seen in the last 10 years. And certainly it's something that I think everybody's getting more into because we're just all getting more social, more hooked up online. Like that's where we find our people is online. So yeah, so sorry if that was a long winding path, but it's all the different ways that people get there.
A lot of stuff to hold on there, and I just wanted to, because you mentioned the DCI, the digital consumer intelligence, and I have another question about the programmatic SEO aspect. I just wanted to clarify for our listeners who may not be as versed in e-commerce. Maybe they work in SaaS that doesn't have that much of a need to generate automatic pages. So maybe you could just you don't have to break down the process, but just dive a little bit deeper into it, because obviously I understand that you are experts and you have your own SEO consulting firm, and obviously you want people to come to you for these services. But is there anything that people can do on their own without your help in terms of identifying, even at least identifying? I'm sorry, I'm throwing 3 questions on there. Let's start off with DCI. Let's dig a bit deeper into that in terms of, I heard you mention like you crawl Reddit. Is everything done manually and to collect this information, or is this so you're using some sort of a set of tools?
So it kind of depends on what the question is. Depends on where we want to crawl, what data sets we want to access. But at the heart, DCI is really just using kind of those traditional research methods to influence other parts of the business. But by that, I mean, like, yes, we do, as SEOs, we are really well versed in keyword research, but there's also lots of rich data other places that we can tap into the APIs. So for example, in addition to keyword research, and you have all the tools that can help automate that, we've also built our own, like, you can tap into the YouTube API and start pulling video data and engagement data, and even start pulling the comments themselves. So what we'll do is we'll actually just utilize APIs that already exist, or we have crawlers that we've built in order to get that information. And then we'll use a lot of machine learning models to kind of help us parse it out and start to make sense, right? Because like we've had one project where it was 1.6 million YouTube videos that we pulled the data on. And we were able from there to, to use topic modeling and clustering in order to understand what are the different topics that are being talked about in these videos. Then from there, look at the engagement and what are users actually engaging with regularly and try to parse that out. And then from there, within a topic, do sentiment analysis using machine learning on the comments themselves to identify where is there more need, where are these videos actually answering users' questions. So that's just one example of where you can, obviously that project took some time, but to do that manually or to do the same level of research with your traditional market research, Gartner and those guys, that would take 9 to 18 months. It took us about 2 weeks to pull all of that information and really come together with some recommendations for the client about where they can focus and kind of find these areas to build. So that's
to that point, I actually want to add, it's not just about understanding interest, it's also about understanding competition. So that's actually a major reason why we're doing a lot of these things. It's a lot of growing brands or brands that are already big that are moving into a space that want to know, okay, what is the landscape? What's happening today? Where can I make a mark really quickly? Where can I stand out? So sometimes it's about positioning, right? To understand this is an unmet need. This is a place where I can make moves really quickly. This is where people are just being underserved, right? So I think that that's a really important perspective in understanding how we can use this data. And to Sam's point, anyone can do this research. We have the same data sets. I am biased to think that we do it better, right? Because it's about pulling insights and understanding your data. So yes, I think it's approachable, and I think everyone should be trying to do this and learning and pulling it together in, experimenting with these different machine learning scripts. A lot of people are doing that. So it's really the application of how we're doing it that makes it different, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of DCI is a lot of this data, it is publicly available, right? Sure, if one of the best places where we find data for clients is in their GSC. So okay, you're not going to be able to get into let's say you're trying to compete with Outlook for whatever reason. You're not going to get a Microsoft's GSC. You're just not. But you can still utilize a lot of that information or like I say, look at Reddit for sentiment analysis on comments and what posts are doing. All TikTok URLs, all videos on TikTok are publicly accessible. So you can crawl based on a category or based on a tag and pull in that information. So there's just so much information out there that definitely I think part of the art form comes into how do you determine is enough versus too much? Because you could have paralysis of analysis. I don't remember which version that goes in. But yeah, just understanding there's a lot of data that's available. And then even too, there's probably a lot of data that your company is already sitting on that you can leverage to identify some of these opportunities. So like I say, just different applications of your products, different applications of your services, the different pain points that are bringing people and where your audience wants to add to the conversation. So
like when you said crawling, did you say 1.5 million videos on YouTube? That's just for the client. That's just one client, right?
That's correct.
Competition. That's not even the competition.
Oh, it was their competition's channels. Yes.
Oh, so that was the analysis of all the competitors. Okay, so I was thinking that's a lot just to analyze even a single website. But if you take the competition into account, there's just I just wanted to get for our listeners to understand to what degree they can do this on their own and to what degree they need help and expertise, and just because I've been trying to understand whether we can do this on our own. Just have these sort of scaling places, and obviously we're already marking our 10th anniversary this year, so I hope we have our scaling game down. But definitely, I just want our listeners to take this into account. 18 months versus 2 weeks of analyzing so much data that I haven't even thought about. We're always trying to go on a hunch. You get a feeling, you sort of have this persona. And you have this ideal customer persona as well, and you just try to sort of guess, but you're just sort of changing the playing field for this. The other question that I had was about programmatic SEO with automated paid generation. Well, okay, I can imagine e-commerce businesses. You have I don't know, thousands of different items coming from a manufacturer, and just have to sort of quickly go through the system and make it available online. But what about, can this be applicable for other companies? And if yes, to what degree? Because I'm just trying to figure out how would we automatically generate something for a SaaS company, and I'm just struggling. Obviously, with AI, we're starting to think about it. The next obstacle that we run into is like these AI checkers. Like, this was written with AI, and it sort of gives a red flag to different sources of content. So just going back, starting from maybe a more basic level about programmatic SEO, how is this approached in terms of the development content?
Great question. I think, frankly, the applications, like e-commerce is not the most common application. I think we are more often practicing this in the SaaS world, in lead-based businesses, where we're really understanding, again, to Sam's point, here are the pain points. So we can do our research, we can understand these keywords align to this pain point, these keywords align to this pain point. And sometimes there's a bunch of those, right? And then we understand, oh, for this user or this persona, they have very different use cases and they have very different pain points. So you can create pages that speak to each of those varieties of needs in a very specific way, so that you can meet that very quickly. So if people are literally using different words to search for different things because they have different, like it's different doorways almost into your website or understanding your product and how it's useful. So for us, that just starts with the data, like what are people looking for? And where can I replicate that pattern? And how does that prompt how we organize? Here's how we filter it, and here's how we group it. So it's almost like bringing the e-commerce like category, almost like facets and filters, right, to a business that's not around e-commerce, because we group it in this way, we group it in this way, and these products apply, or these services apply, or these places to stay apply in the Airbnb example. So when you, again, know this is what it is, so then I can determine, yeah, this is how we group it, and this is what pages we're going to build, and this is the information on these pages, and this is how we provide value and be compelling and make it unique and different. Because you don't just want to build some generic page, right? You want to build a variety of things. An example there might be Yelp. Like, what is Yelp if not user-generated content from all their different businesses, creating these business profiles and then putting it together in different compelling ways, whether that's around your location or whether that's around your need to look for like a porch near you or whatever it is you're looking for in a restaurant. So the way they've collected those together, they've been really thoughtful. So they're not using so much a programmatic strategy as they're using a UGC way to scale, but it's the same impact, and it's a way to group those things based on people's varying needs that do evolve. Do you care about the porch that's heated, right? There's so many minute variations that are really important to your experience of enjoying that restaurant.
And I would say a SaaS example might be, let's say it's scheduling software. You might have different pages for scheduling for SEO consultants versus scheduling for lawyers versus scheduling for a barbershop, right? Very different audiences. At the end of the day, we're just looking to manage our calendar. How different, like obviously brick and mortar, there could be all different kinds of features within that platform, but we're all looking for, I want something that's going to work. I want something that's reliable. I want something that my customers can easily access, right? Those basic needs don't really change. But how I, as that SaaS brand, want to talk to each of those audiences is wildly different. So that's where like the programmatic can come in, as far as like, you don't want it to be as bad as like, hello, first name, right? But just those types of thoughts about like, so like a programmatic that I would build for that is kind of understanding, working with the system and understanding, okay, by the different roles that I've identified or the different industries, verticals, whatever that differentiation is, can I reorder the features based on what the priority is for that user, right? That'd be something that's pretty powerful. And if you set up your CMS or whatever's powering the programmatic page creation, could be fairly simple and fairly fast. And is it something that like, I just want to be able to put it in a spreadsheet and upload it into my website? Like those are the types of systems that when you think about them on the front end, before you build them, you can make it that much faster and get to that level of this feels like a very custom built page, though I took some very clear shortcuts to get there. And certainly one of the places where I think we've seen the most success in getting that custom curation feel is kind of bringing in that UGC. So whether it's, tagging reviews according to certain industries, like those are just some really powerful but easy ways to save a ton of time and build programmatic in a way that is meaningful, that's still unique, and can compete. Because I think programmatic, it's way too easy to just like basically what we all did before Hummingbird came out of like, here's the 20 variations of the word refrigerator that people don't know how to spell. That word still trips me up. But we had 20 different pages according to how it was spelled because it's what we had to do. And that feels like programmatic is kind of reinforcing that again. Let's do better.
Let's do better. I think another obvious example here is localization. So say you're a nationwide company with these local offices and you want to be performing better locally. It's not something people think about in terms of programmatic SEO. P.S. I kind of hate that word. I think it's very confusing, especially with paid search. Like, rebrand people. Come up with something else. But,
yeah, it's definitely not like programmatic bidding at all.
Yes. So if you have that, best practices you want in an individual page on your website for an individual location in this city and state that's different than one in this city and state, right? If you're Walmart or Domino's, you can get away with just making those exactly the same page with just the address and name difference or whatever, phone number difference. But in order to compete, other businesses have to do better. So how do you really tailor those pages? And thinking about like, how can we tailor the reviews to be local? How can we talk about local landmarks? How can we give directions that are specific to that audience? How can you use alt text and alter it to be specific to that location? Or maybe, like in those reviews, feature those people that are in those companies in those areas to really localize and give context at scale. So rather than worrying about how do I go through and write 4 different paragraphs for all of my 150 different locations, like there's ways you can be smart and thoughtful about, okay, here's the variations, here's how we localize, here's how we can pick the right users, and you can use that in a database to automatically drive that and plug that in smartly. And I'm not saying you don't curate or do any customization, because you probably do, especially for those locations that matter. But I think we can be doing a lot better with making those pages rich and interesting and useful to meet search needs.
A question comes to mind, like how often would you update this programmatic SEO approach? Because the competition never sleeps, and obviously when you decide that this approach is going to work, you've done the competitive research by that point, and you've decided that okay, this is the dynamic fields that I'm going to use, or the auto-generated stuff that like the IDs that have to be here. But how often would you go back to that process just to make sure that you're still on track?
Mm-hmm. So this is a juicy question, because to Sam's point about Airbnb, I don't see Airbnb ranking anymore for Denver stays. I see Vrbo. I see other brands. So we're always raising the bar. I think looking to see what search interest has changed over time is really compelling. So looking at your data again, especially like maybe yearly, or maybe anytime something substantial has happened. So think about COVID times, right? Like search interest changed overnight dramatically. And what you meant by what you searched is probably pretty different. And then how often you search for a thing is pretty different. So keeping up with the trends of how that's changing, or using a tool like Google Trends or Pinterest Trends to understand what are people doing and what's trajectory is changing. And then always coming back to those pages and always thinking about the user and how do we make it more better? How do we make this more compelling? So what did Vrbo do to make their Denver stays page that much more compelling so that they're ranked #1, not Airbnb?
No. I think it's one of those times where a large part of that, I hate this answer, but it does kind of depend on what the competition is doing and what performance you're seeing. Like, I would say, you want to do it at least annually, but there's definitely some industries where you need to do it 2 times a year, 4 times a year. I mean, for us in SEO, monthly is probably the right answer, because our job changes so wildly. It's one of the reasons I love it. Also, one of the reasons it's exhausting. So I think to Tory's point, a lot of it just depends on what is kind of the flavor of your industry and how often things are changing, and just kind of keeping up to date with big changes for your industry. So, right now everybody's talking about AI. So really thinking about like, how is your industry applying AI? How do you either add that to your tool set or correct it in your tool set, or, there's a lot of different ways, but those would be the things that I would say it's time to assess. And then of course, hopefully you've got some regular reporting going on and you're understanding what's the organic health of these kind of scaling pages, regardless of which method you're using. Is that generating traffic? And more to the point, is it generating the right kind of traffic? Like, are you still meeting the overall end business goals, right? If we've produced a lot of pages, but, you know, you're a B2B company and you're not producing business leads, it's time to reassess that strategy and that tactic and figure out, like, is it conversion optimization you need to do? Or is it like, this is just not reaching the right target? Because all of those things definitely happen. So at least annually, I think is what I would do as far as an analysis, especially because these can be done relatively quickly. The first one always takes the most time. And then after that, you're just kind of like amending and updating the research that you have. I will say for us, it's been very rare that we're suddenly like, well, scrap everything we thought we knew. It's all wrong. Like, if we've done one of these projects, we're pretty much always just adding on to it.
Yeah, new competitors, new perspectives when they've launched a new audience with a new pain point. You know,
COVID being the exception, because
throw everything out the window.
Yeah, one thought that goes to mind is like, there's no set it and forget it example. Just once again, if people are thinking, like, business owners who are listening to this podcast are thinking about, okay, so I'm just gonna do this once and I'm good to go, right? So like you said, analyzing 1.5 million videos, that for you, it's just a matter of amending it later on, just adding a bit more. But for if it's an individual doing it, well, not individual, but like a small company doing it themselves, it sounds like the only thing they're going to be doing is just analyzing, preparing for scaling, and not actually doing any work. So just yeah, I'm very, very excited in the services that your company provides, because I haven't heard. We've interviewed digital agencies before, but obviously you don't present yourself as a digital agency. It's SEO consulting firm, so it sort of even feels a bit more like on the next level. But getting back,
intentional. I care a lot about transition. I have many ideas. We are working on lots of things. So yeah, I think it's important to pay attention to the competition and to know what they're doing. It's important to differentiate and know what you have that can stand out from the crowd.
No, for sure. When I was getting ready for this podcast and exploring your stuff, I was thinking, like, okay, so these guys are not just saying, oh, we'll do the keyword research for you, competitive research for you, and find the backlinks, just stuff like that, you know, just the general terms that everybody uses. But you transform everything into a sort of a process that's not as simple as it may seem, and include your expertise and experience. So just, yeah, I'm already very interested in seeing, like, what would you potentially suggest to, like, even our business. But obviously this is, it can't be, it's not a 5-minute discussion for sure. Let's go back to SEO scaling. So we've talked about the different methods for SEO scaling, including programmatic SEO, so the page generation. We've talked about user generated content. Or what other methods are there, or did I miss something?
Localization.
Oh, right.
Localization matters. Content strategies are also a primary way companies scale. So whether they're hiring a giant in-house team, or whether they're working with freelancers, or whether they're using some sort of language learning model like a ChatGPT, there's lots of ways to just create content. And it's not just creating the content, it's also clustering them together in meaningful ways, right? So everything's about, okay, and this is the subject, how do we roll it up? How do we roll it up? How do we roll it up? And hit different people at different points in the funnel and meet all their different needs. But I'd say those are the most common 4 ways to do it: localization, UGC, programmatic, and just content.
Great. Let's move on to the next question, because yeah, we covered the examples basically. I wanted to find out, how would a company, or not a company, but like a website or a business with a website, understand like its starting position? If I were to say that I need to scale up, get ready for this, what are the technical aspects that I need to look into on my website, or just in general in terms of the way my business is digitally set up? What do I specifically need to look out for? Just to know that I am good for this. This is something that I am that, like, scaling is something that this business is not capable but eligible for.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few things to think through here. You know, really your platform matters a lot. Like, UGC doesn't work on all platforms, and programmatic does not work on all platforms. We recently were...
Sorry, when you say platforms, you mean customer management, CMS?
Yeah, CMS, exactly. Some systems have it set up to scale and some don't. frankly, depending on the subject matter. So really making sure your platform meets your needs. So first, you got to start with defining needs. If you start with your data, this is what we want to do. This is how we want to route these pages. This is how we want the URLs to look. This is how we want the metadata to look. These are the pages. We've wireframed them. Okay, we understand our needs. Then you can go to your platform and see, is that meeting needs? Is that capable of doing those things? So you're thinking about like an editable robots.txt file, a dynamic sitemap. So all of these normal SEO pieces that you would normally want in any platform. You want to make sure pagination is good. You want to make sure you have a good redirect management tool, that your URLs are going to be reasonable and readable for users and organized well so that your data and reporting works effectively. You're going to want to think about your ability to scale pages. So can you use dynamic fields, for example, not available on all CMSs, in order to drive unique metadata, unique alt text, unique headers, in order to make these really, really tailored and customized to the specific need? You're going to want to customize probably your schema so you can show the right information at the right time and get that rich markup, make sure search engines understand all the variations. If you are going to scale, you'd probably want to think through your ADA compliance, because if your platform doesn't enable you to do certain things and suddenly you're at scale, you are probably a bigger target for legal action if you're not accessible, right? So before you start that, think about if your platform can support that. Rendering matters for all sites, right? Can search engines access this content, and how much work do you make them do to do it? And then anything customized around the needs of what your program is. But one of the things that I care most about is really having the ability to control things globally and also override them on a very granular level. So for instance, when we've set up UGC programs, a common, like, you want lots of UGC, you want all these variations, it's creating this rich and compelling content, but some of it is just not going to be as good as other pieces of content. So maybe you want to use, say, dynamic default logic ways to say, hey, if they only submitted this piece of UGC and they only added 5 characters to the description, maybe I don't bother to index it. So you can automatically set robots.txt based on, the robots meta based on these specific fields. Do they have a custom title? Do they have a custom description? Did they add an image? Did they add alt text? Did they add all these other things? You can require those fields, but you can also just set that automatically. But then sometimes you're going to have this case where someone did not add a lot of text and it might be quote unquote thin content, but also they promoted the hell out of it and now you have 50 good backlinks. So can you override that setting? So that is what I might call like global defaults, but really granular control over the, like an 80-20 situation. I want almost always to be this, but maybe on those pages that are pulling in the majority of the results, you want to add an extra layer of extra special to make those really, really tailored in a way you're not going to bother with for that 80% that's not driving the traffic. So can you do that? So a lot is just defining in your CMS, do what you want it to do.
Yeah, and I think, Tory, your point of the first thing you have to do is set the requirements and get an idea of what you want is the biggest thing. Because definitely, like, where we've seen the most work is when, like, so for example, about like the local pages for a national chain, and you want to bring in the team that works at that brick and mortar store. Yep. That information lives somewhere in your company, probably not your website, and it's going to be changing all the time, right? Like if you are a brick and mortar store, your retail, you have a lot of change in personnel all the time. So how do you keep that up to date? That's really where like integrations between your CMS and your HR system, obviously making sure that personally identifiable information and people's privacy are protected. But like those are the things that you really need to start thinking about if that's where you're going to be pulling that data. That information already lives somewhere in your organization. Just how do you get access to it? Those are the things. And then to Tory's point, like the rules and the logic that you want around that content is really where a lot of the thought needs to be done. But I love your call of like, that's an 80-20. Think about what you want most of the time to be. Like think of the happy path, and then you can start thinking about the exceptions and really build your requirements from that.
When you're want to override something, like say you already have everything set up, you're saying that like 5 words in a comment is not enough, and I want to cut that. And how do you know in advance that there might be a case like you mentioned, like a person promotes the hell out of something, but it doesn't have a lot of words in it? How do you know in advance about the situation? And if you don't know about it in advance, how do you not miss it if it's just sort of being analyzed by a program and just sort of submitted or declined, and how would you like override on on demand, and just how do you find that that's something that just went already through the system, but it was wrong for it to go through the system? How would that approach go?
So I can tell you the actual way that I've done this, which is typically, okay, I have a global rule that has this logic, and I have a field in admin. That means I can check a box and I can change this field, and I can just override the default. So there's a logic level, and it's ordered in a way in the custom code so we're almost always working with custom development teams to really tailor solutions. And yeah, there was a box I could check. So if I'm doing a semi-annual backlink audit to really understand what's grown, I can say, these are the 3 that matter. I'm going to go flip a box on 3. And suddenly we get the power of those links, and everything else follows the global group. Or I can jump in and say, hey, this market is bigger and it has more search volume and it has more variations of keywords around this. So I'm going to go through and really make this pattern of alt text slightly different and slightly better for this location, because it's really about that market and that market's needs. So yeah, it's all about custom development.
Yeah, and I will say, to your point, I think a lot of being able to like set that global rule and understand what are the exceptions that are going to come. You try to think about them on the front end as much as possible, but there is a level of you are going to be surprised. And then that ends up being a ticket because maybe we hadn't thought we'd need an override for that, but now we do. And so, sometimes there is a little bit of that learning pain, but, that's really the heart of SEO, is that we're constantly changing and we're iterative. And, even what worked last week may not work this week because Google updated ABC and whatever. I think that's a big part of it, is kind of understanding that SEO is an art form. It is not a science. You cannot get it perfectly because it is a living organism. It is growing. And what you said earlier, your competitors haven't stopped. So your race is constantly changing. It's kind of like you've got a destination or a finish line. It's constantly moving because your competitors are moving it. And so as long as you're taking SEO and these pages even with that kind of mindset of like, all we can do is move in the right direction. There is no end goal. So sometimes it's really just you got to be prepared that there's going to be learning experiences, document everything, and you'll just kind of take
some of it's foreplanning because you know how SEO works, right? Like, that SEO gets value from the quality of the page copy and the right headers that align to the keywords. And it also gets value from backlinks. So think about what are those factors that you're going to measure, which we're going to talk about later, and how will they vary and what are the different common situations, and plan in advance for that. And to Sam's point, stuff will come up that you didn't think of, and that's okay. And hopefully it's custom software and you can just fix that later.
Hopefully you'll get engineering time again.
Well, hopefully you've driven enough scale that it's meaningful and it's worthwhile.
Also true. Yes.
We sort of touched on the technical aspects. I wanted to talk about the other side of of this coin. So what are some examples of the technical debt that might accumulate as you scale your SEO efforts? And how would you suggest to address these issues to maintain the performance of a website?
Yeah. So whether it's a content strategy form of growth or it's UGC, you're going to have problems with quality. So you're going to want to think through what mechanisms do you build to deal with that so that search engines aren't wasting their time crawling all those variations once you create them. If it's UGC, also keep in mind users will remove it at some point. If they have control to add it, they probably have control to remove it. So you need to build in processes instead of like, oh, I have to do a manual audit to see what 404s happened every 6 months. Maybe you can just set that based on an admin field that says, hey, this is deleted. Okay, then I should just redirect it automatically to say the category page. So some of this you can plan in advance and some you just deal with later. Sometimes it's old data. Sometimes the content strategy and this article you wrote is just old because your search intent evolved. So you're auditing and you're making sure you're on top of those things. Or like people just forget to do things. So it's not like debt, but if you didn't do link building, if you didn't strategize a way to get links to all these variations and you didn't make it easy for users to do, then they're not going to provide value like they would otherwise, right? It's not all about on-page SEO. Bad internal linking is also a common thing. So yeah, it's a lot about dealing with dead and empty pages and making crawlability good. So common normal SEO things, frankly. Yeah, normal tech debt. But fair.
Some of the times where we see technical debt start to build or you're running into technical limitations. So definitely depending on which CMS you're using, if you're really scaling, like WordPress is PHP based. If you're running 1 million pages on WordPress, you are definitely running into some server performance because the database that's paired with that is so large and not optimized. Unless you've got a really good DBA, there probably is a lot of just old crap and archived stuff that still lives in your WordPress database, even though you can't see it in the WordPress backend. It's still in your database. If you've ever noticed you delete a plugin and then you add it back and you're like, oh, all my data's still there. Yeah, that's because that table never went away. So there's a lot of those things that you have to start thinking about. And we're definitely seeing, people who are using WordPress for their CMS are starting to take the scalable parts of it and putting those on different front ends because of just the intense load on the server. And then you start getting to actually really high server costs. So usually having a server is pretty cheap, but once you get to a certain level, it's not. You can actually save a lot of money. So I would say those are the things the considerations that start coming. But also, to be frank, I would not expect an internal SEO team to have any oversight of that or to understand that that's what's going on. I feel like what would happen is an SEO would raise their hand and say, hey, our crux report is looking awful. Can we talk about why? You are going to have to rely on your engineering team or your developers to understand that that's kind of the bloat that's happening. Basically, my advice to internal marketing teams is just to raise your hand and also speak more to like, here's the problem I'm seeing. Let the engineers find the solution because that's what they're good at. That's what they do. When you approach it with more like a partnership in mind, you're going to be a lot more successful than trying to be prescriptive of like, I need you to fix this. It might not be, there could be times it's not a bloat problem. Actually, just your WordPress query is very inefficient. Like you don't know if it needs to be refactored or if you just have a lot of crap in the database. So long story short, those are definitely some things like once you start scaling your content, you start running into some big performance issues that these smaller brands have probably never encountered before. And it might be time to pull in like a consultant, whether it's a networking and storage person or an engineer or even just an experienced marketer who's done this before.
Yeah, because you started talking about WordPress, and I'm thinking like about a year ago, our development team said that we no longer can upload GIFs that are like larger than whatever, because they said our pages started slowing down because there are too many of them. So yeah,
use a CDN.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. Like there are those limitations. And I'd even say there's so many times where some of our colleagues in the SEO community will just message us and be like, our developer said this, is this realistic? And sometimes it is. Sometimes as a developer, we are lazy people. There is a reason we write things to do the work for us. So it definitely happens. I'm also married to a developer and I would say that exactly to his face. And I'm pretty sure I have. But, it's kind of interesting. There are limitations. And I will say when it comes to once you start doing scale, you're going to find the limits of your platform extremely quickly. Yeah. The reason why I mentioned WordPress is just because it's very popular, but they all have them, frankly. So,
frankly, WordPress has the ability to scale when other platforms don't, when they're closed platforms, when they just don't enable that ability. It's possible on WordPress. You're just going to need to do some things to make that workable.
Yeah. So at least it's a scalable solution for us, but like other companies may run into problems that they chose the wrong CMS, that they sort of hit a ceiling and they have to move their house somewhere else completely and just start all over, because you can't just put your the setup from one CMS to another and just think it'll work.
I will say, though, there are times where you can kind of parse it out. I think there's a lot of times where marketing teams think like it has to be one CMS or another. If you are doing scalable content, it's likely that you could actually just pull out the scalable piece and you can still have it be all subfolders. And I mean, sure, there's some pain points because now the marketing team has to manage 2 different CMSs, but maybe you just do it in a phased approach. That way it's less painful and less elephant or like gargantuan project, you can sometimes phase these things out. And that's definitely things that we've worked on with clients. And, maybe it's like their editorial team never leaves WordPress. Because what's happening is actually it's just these 2 custom post types that we've now created. The editorial team and the content management team still does it in WordPress. It's just on the front end, it's pulling Gatsby instead of using the WordPress template. Things like that. There are solutions. There's usually middle grounds. Obviously, those are things you got to work with your engineering team, but it doesn't have to be all or nothing every time.
Great. Thanks a lot, ladies. And I just wanted to, it's not a final question, but before we go to the takeaway, I wanted to talk about measuring and tracking the results just to make sure that you're on track, analyzing. So say that I have my SEO scaling in place. Obviously, it's just after just 1 hour of talking, it just sounds impossible for me to do it. Just like I can't even visualize the process. Obviously, it's doable, but I just can't visualize the process because it just seems so immense. So I wanted to talk about the tracking, measuring performance, just to make sure that all the goals are ultimately met in terms of the business goals, in terms of the technical requirements. How do you keep tabs on everything going on and just making sure that you're moving forward in the right direction? And tracking.
So this is where, when you're planning your content, you should also be thinking about how you're going to measure it. So whatever's going to be scaled, right? So where you're thinking about how are you grouping the different points of information, like are there categories, are there facets, are there filters? All of those types of things that you're doing on the planning end to even just build your technical requirements, kind of figure out what is it going to take shape as. Use those same kind of organizations to start looking at performance. So ways that we like to do that, we like to do content groupings in Google Analytics. You kind of have to fudge that a little bit with GA4, but totally possible, where you can basically add like page tags or add your own custom content groupings. And that's something that if you think about that on the front end, then that can be in the code already when it's built, so that you're not trying to implement that later with GTM, you're not adding more load time. It's just part of the page template itself. So really start thinking about how you want to group and how you want to understand the different ways that content is performing. So if we take that local branches, right? I want to understand for my different regional and area managers, okay? I have a branch manager who needs to know how their page is doing. So I need to think about what kind of reporting they want. I need to think about the area and regional managers. They want to see all of theirs. So how do I tag those appropriately to say these all belong to Sharon and these all belong to Fritz? Keeping those things in mind when you're automatically grouping how the pages are going to be built and then how you want to report on them. If you do it at the same time, you save yourself a lot of pain later. And then that's also a really good way and a really good check to make sure that what you're planning for this scaling content or scaling pages actually aligns with your business goals.
Never that.
Yeah, like it needs to come back to what are you trying to do? Like if Sharon is trying to understand how her region is going with a certain demographic, do you need to try to input any kind of demographic data? Do you need to tie that in with like store visit information, right? Now we're getting very advanced. But if you have those ideas in mind, it's much easier to build that than to try to retrofit later. So really thinking about how are you grouping that content. So, for a lot of SaaS or e-commerce, I'm really thinking like, I want to understand by the content type, right? Are people searching for this based on their city, based on their role? So those are the different kind of like content groupings that I want to understand. Where are we positioning? Where are we getting good visibility? What types of keywords align with those that I kind of want to keep tabs on? And, obviously, if you're doing location-based keywords, suddenly we have 20 million keywords to rank and track. We don't want to do that, but we want to understand, like, if it's a local page or a city-based page, how are those performing on a whole? If my business, like I say, is set up into regions, I might want to understand that. If you've got, maybe you're doing more of the content marketing play and you've got, all right, well, this is the content funnel for barbershops. Put all those pieces together. How is it performing versus the content funnel for lawyers versus the content funnel for SEO agencies, right? When you start really thinking about the groupings that you want for your content anyways, and then does that answer the question of you want to know how it's going based on other needs? So like, does your sales team need different reporting? Who are the different stakeholders that are going to be interested in this? Those are the things that you have to think about, and it can get pretty massive. But all in all, usually you're looking for the same things that we normally look for in SEO. Are impressions being picked up? Is that leading to clicks? Is that leading to users on my page? Am I converting these users into customers? Those are usually the questions that people are asking. It's more about how grouped or how do they want that information or data segmented out based on the page or based on the user. That usually aligns really well with how you're doing your information architecture anyways.
Awesome. You, Terry, care a lot about analytics?
Yeah, we don't like any of this. We love data, if you could tell.
Yeah. I could tell for sure, and I'm just like, you're making like us, everybody look bad. Like I'm just thinking like, oh, who else just thinks about so much data? And I'm not saying that it's bad. Just gets my like the light bulb going, and I'm already thinking like we have to go to talk to our head of SEO just to make sure that everything like we're there at least aware of all the different nuances that you brought up today, and it just seems that although it may seem there's a lot to talk about, there's a lot to absorb, but it also sort of when you understand it, it's not that difficult, but it's a matter of doing it properly and efficiently just to get the results. Because we're like, as soon as you started explaining to me, I'm like, okay, so that goes into this shelf. That goes. I started understanding stuff, but it's just like a matter of labeling, not just labeling, but like doing it properly. Because just so many take into account. Like you said, all the examples. Just scalability does that, right? And
like I said, that's where it gets really exciting, that you can get across different teams and do a lot of cross collaboration within your company. But that also means you now have more stakeholders, you've got more voices, you've got more cooks in the kitchen, however you want to talk about it. But ultimately, when you're doing it, check in as much as possible to say, what business objective am I meeting? What is this leading to? And as long as you're always finding a good answer for that and you're not having to make it up on the fly, you're probably moving in the right direction. That would be my biggest piece of advice, is just always bring it back to that business objective, because that is how you get bigger buy-in too. That's what that manager wants to talk about. That's what that CEO wants to talk about, is how are you moving whatever our biggest goal is. And as long as you're aligning with that, you will likely get buy-in. I can't say you always will, but hopefully you will.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, just creating a measurement plan is an underrated path. So by that, I just mean documenting, these are the objectives. These are the KPIs that align with them. Here's the tracking that we're going to set up and able to do this. Here's how we're segmenting. And then having a conversation with the different stakeholders and their different needs and documenting that and making sure it's all in place and then making sure it's tracked. And then you've created your dashboards and then everything's aligned, rather than, hey, I think I want to track impressions and the links. And then, oh crap, my CEO wants to learn about this, and it's too late because I didn't collect that in the first place. So it's not like GA can magically come up with that. So you need to really be thoughtful and plan that in advance, and really just literally documenting it and having a place where everyone can refer to it can be an underrated way to just go about that. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can just be, let's all write it down. Let's talk to the people. Here's our plan, go.
Yeah, it gets everyone on the same page. It's also really good for when things break. You know what elements it might have been. And then it's also, like I say, it's just a great communication to get everyone on the same page. I always talk about, you need a plan for if you get hit by a bus. You want to knowledge share as much as possible. Plus, to Tori's point, GA4, even more than universal, you can't backtrack on data. Like it's a really powerful tool, and you configure it to track exactly what you want to track and nothing else. But that means that you got to turn it on first, or you got to figure out that configuration. And if you don't set it up in the way that you need the data, that time is just lost. You can't make it up. So
so there's still time for our listeners to catch up with GA4. They're shutting down, I think, like very soon, Universal.
July 1st.
Oh, when?
July 1st.
Oh, July 1st. So
you got a few months. Couple months?
A couple of months. Yeah, by the time this goes out, a couple of months still. It's going to go out in a week. It's just, Sam, you already started talking about, like, make sure to focus on the business objective, and it sounded so like a sort of a takeaway for me, on this whole thing. But this is actually your takeaway on tracking data. But I wanted to get your thoughts on, like, what is the one thing that you would like our listeners to do after hearing this conversation that we just had, besides reaching out to a gray.company, that's GRAYDOT company. In case you're not gonna see it up on the screen. So what is the one thing that you would like businesses who definitely need to, like, everybody needs to think about scalability, but what would you suggest, like, one thing to do, like, if they haven't thought about this yet?
I mean, sounds silly, but look at your data, look at your keywords, see what your audience is doing. Everything starts with what are needs and are you meeting them, and how do you meet them better? You can identify those patterns. You could say, hey, a lot of people are looking for this variation, and we don't have a page for that. You're not going to show up for it if you don't have a page for it. So you have, and when you can replicate, well, okay, here's this, and then here's this other variation of this, and this other variation of this, and suddenly you have something you can start to replicate. So just start with your GSC data, your keyword data, what people are doing on YouTube, wherever it is, what's happening, what do people need, and how do we meet that need? That's all marketing is.
Great, Tori. Thank you. And Sam, what would your takeaway be, maybe from the CDO perspective?
So yeah, very similar. You are sitting on a lot of data. Learn how to mine it, learn how to access it, and then also use this chance to be creative. I feel like for a lot of SEOs, we don't get, especially for tech SEOs, which I definitely lean more technical, obviously. I don't often feel like I get to be as creative as I want to be. This is a chance to be creative. And if your data is not really showing you any themes, just take some time to talk to your sales teams, talk to customers or end clients if you can. The patterns will present themselves as long as you're going, like, try to be as unbiased as possible. They will start to show themselves for sure.
Well, thank you, Sam, and thank you, Tory, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to do this with me and to share this amazing information and framework, and just get that creative juice flowing in the heads of our listeners. Because yeah, definitely, this is something that I haven't discovered before, and I'm just personally very happy to have been a part of this and had the opportunity to ask my own questions. So. Once again, thank you for taking the time to be here, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. And be sure to subscribe to join the next episode of SEO Rankings Do Follow podcast.